Let's talk fanfiction. It's no secret that the internet has given fanfiction a bad reputation over the years. Why? Well, some reasons come to mind, and considering them, it really isn't that surprising. The fact is that most fan stories are pretty terrible. The problem is that people tend to focus so much on the bad stuff that the good stuff gets kind of thrown under the bus. It may not be the biggest revelation to say this, but good fanfiction exists, and that's what I'm hoping to explore. When it comes to reading fanfics, I think it's best to go in with an open mindset. If you reject everything that doesn't seem like it would be canon, well, you probably aren't reading fanfiction in the first place. Don't get me wrong, there are things I don't like in fanfiction. However, if you're willing to let some stuff slide, you could come across something pretty good. Or really bad. Fanfiction enjoyment is subjective. It doesn't always have to respect canon to be liked, and just because I don't enjoy a story, or part of a story, doesn't mean that nobody will. If you ask me, there's always a little something for everyone somewhere. In this video, I'm exploring a Little Mario fanfic known as The Insane Smiles. It's written by user DarkMarkSoul on fanfiction.net and DeviantArt. As you can see from the cover, the story prominently features the characters of Dimentio from Super Paper Mario and Fawful from the Mario and Luigi series. You know, if you squint. In this story, Fawful and Dimentio team up to take out their worst enemies, the Mario Bros. Now, this is a cool concept to say the least. Why? Well, besides how cool they were in their respective series, these guys share a good amount of similarities. They have a funny way of speaking, they surpass their masters, and they both use a dark artifact to accomplish their goals. Of course, that isn't to say they're identical. Far from it. These two have their fair share of differences. One typically uses metaphors, while the other exclusively uses similes. One wants to conquer the world, while the other wants to remake it. One uses magic, while the other uses machinery and the power of science! The magician and the inventor. The invader and the manipulator. With their personalities meshing together like milk and cookies, these two would form a furiously charming duo. This is actually one of the first fanfictions I remember reading, which is why I chose it for this video. I'd say that the story is one that takes quite a few liberties. For example, the regular and Paper Mario worlds are now treated as one. This is understandable since at the time it was being written, Paper Jam hadn't come out yet. Dream Team hadn't come out yet. There was also a fan theory proposing that the Paper Mario games were really just stage plays. I mean, with a setup like this, it was certainly possible. There shouldn't be too much cause for concern, though. The source material, the games, is still canon to this tale, albeit interpreted in a particular manner. Just don't go in expecting a Mario story. Think of it more as a story with Mario characters, if that makes sense. So, without further ado, like expert divers over a pool at the Olympics, let's jump right into it. Our story begins with the protagonist, Fawful, being dead. Well, that was fast. Good night, everybody! No, I'm joking. But seriously, that's how it starts. Nowhere to go but up, I guess. So specifically, this takes place sometime after Fawful blows himself up at the end of Bowser's Inside Story. Now, he finds himself in the Paper Mario equivalent of the underworld. The underwear. And he hates it. So, being dead is unpleasant. Huh. We get a flashback to the moment right after Fawful died. It's described as some sort of fall with amalgamations of his worst memories being thrown at him. It turns out that he was hoping to see Cackletta in the afterlife and spent a good amount of time searching for her. But since the witch's soul was destroyed, she isn't there. Seeing no reason to continue his miserable existence, Fawful decides to end his afterlife by throwing himself into the River Twigs. Get it? River Twigs instead of River Styx? Okay. So here, we already have a diversion from canon, as this Fawful actually cares about Cackletta. While not explicitly stated in the games, the bean never actually shows signs of being disturbed by her death. He never even mentions her in his lament in Partners in Time. Meanwhile, this incarnation would actually erase himself, knowing he can't even see her in death. Lucky for him, a random shade pulls him back towards the land before some skeleton hands get a chance to drag him in. Ever the grateful being that he is, Fawful reprimands the creature for saving his life. Afterlife. However, the shade is patient and quickly convinces Fawful to talk about how he died. The being gives a very brief summary of his life and how it was tormented by brothers of red and green. A detail that seems to pique the interest of his new companion. The shade proposes that he get revenge. Fawful dismisses the idea, calling it an impossibility. However, the shade provides us with an explanation as to how death supposedly works in this world. So, when people are alive, they have these energies that make them who they are. When they die, they lose these energies. But if there's something else to take their place, like for example, dark powers granted by an artifact, those can be lost instead. The point is that Fawful's only half dead, which means that he could potentially go back to the world of the living. But not on his own. In other words, tough luck, buddy. Since this is essentially hell we're talking about, where you're not really gonna find the nicest folk, the Shade offers to be friends and shake on it. However, the moment they do, Fawful feels a jolt of electricity go through his body. He lets go, but notices a change in his companion's shape. Then, for no particular reason, the Shade suggests that they pay a visit to Queen Jades, ruler of the underwear. Get it? Jades instead of Hades? Okay. They get to the boatman of the River Twigs, named Carol. Get it? Carol instead of... The guy asks them for 4 coins. The Shade, having no pockets, dumps the bill on Fawful. What a pal, am I right? Anyway, he actually manages to pay it off somehow. How does he have coins? Did the coins die too? How does a coin die? Did they come with him when he died? Because he didn't really have any pockets on him at the time either. Am I looking too deep into this? Maybe. So, as they cross the river, Fawful is understandably pretty nervous, Queen of the Dead and all. But the Shade reassures him.
I am possessing much nervousness,
He admitted. Ha, don't worry. She's not scary.
No?
No, the Shade grinned. In life, I was much scarier than her. Or so I'm told.
What were you liking in life?
The Shade's grin didn't falter. You'll see. Scarier than death. Well, I guess desperate times call for desperate measures. They arrive at Jades' temple, which, by the way, is guarded by D-men. Get it? D-men instead of demon. They come up to the queen, where the Shade reveals that he only brought them there just so he could pull off the ultimate flex and cheat death in front of the Queen of Death. Wow. Fawful puts his hand on the Shade's head, the guy grows limbs, snaps his fingers, and teleports them out of there. After a quick but uncomfortable trip, Fawful finds himself in the world of the living once more. Around him is grass, trees, and even a town in the distance. He's greeted by the voice of his benefactor, who he spots standing under a tree, hidden in the shadows. The bean thanks him and prepares to leave, but his new friend isn't ready to part just yet. He asks Fawful to help him with something in return for getting him out of the underwear. Fawful isn't too thrilled at first, but that quickly changes as their interests seem to line up. The figure wants revenge on Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Bowser. Fawful agrees with a grin, but his smile disappears as he sees his partner, Dimentio, walk out of the shadows. The jester's smile leaves him paralyzed with fear. Wait, what? Let me get this straight. Fawful is creeped out by a smile. You know this is Fawful we're talking about, right? The guy whose smiles are so broad they're literally bigger than his own face? And you're telling me that he's afraid of this? I don't care how unsettling Dimentio's smile is built up as. This is creepier. Anyway, while Fawful is stunned silent, Dimentio decides that it might be time for them to get a base of operations and drags the bean through the dimensions against his will. Dimentio and Fawful arrive at Castle Black. It's as dark and creepy as ever, and Fawful is a bit unsettled by the surroundings. Dimentio leads him to a hall of bedrooms and gives him a choice out of 5. He gets reacquainted with his own before checking up on Fawful. The bean doesn't seem too keen on the first one, which belonged to Mimi, the green shape-shifting Spider-Girl who served Count Bleck in Super Paper Mario. Dimentio recommends the next one, which belonged to Mr. L. He enters Mimi's room himself and does a bit of snooping. Her room is pretty much the same from when he last saw it. Even her diary, which he, of course, reads, is still there. Yeah, because I'm sure Mimi would be the kind of person to abandon all her belongings, including her definitely expensive clothing and her diary, in an old castle in a dimension she never plans to visit ever again. He then goes to check up on Fawful, only to find that he's completely destroyed the room in anger, with tears running down his face. Of course, it's only now that Dimentio is reminded that Mr. L was actually Luigi. Oops. He teleports all of Mr. L's stuff away, leaving the room a blank slate. He gives Fawful the power to travel through dimensions so he can fill it up. The bean goes to the Mushroom Kingdom, but it turns out that the stuff he needs is too expensive. Since Fawful has no weapons ready, Dimentio agrees to steal anything that he needs, including materials for his inventions. After a day of that, the two get back to the castle, and Fawful begins his renovations. Dimentio is doubtful about Fawful's talents because, after all, how good at machinery could a 9-year-old really be? 9-year-old? Look, I know he looks short and has a high-pitched voice and all, but why do you assume he's a kid? He can't just be a short guy with a rather high-pitched voice? After an unspecified amount of time, Fawful excitedly bursts into Dimentio's room, which makes the magician fly about 10 feet in the air. He quickly puts on his mask. It turns out that Fawful made a set of rings that function as a tracking device. Stealing from Sonic, are we? As long as Dimentio wears his, Fawful can find him on his dimensional map at any time. This is despite the fact that he only learned about other dimensions like a day ago. I know Fawful's a genius, but could he really pull that off? Actually, yeah, he probably could. Dimentio, rather impressed by Fawful's creation, puts on the ring. He then gives the bean the mission of mapping out Peach's castle, as it's apparently needed for their plan. One that Fawful doesn't ask about in the slightest. Really? Wouldn't Fawful at least want a say in how his most hated enemies meet their demise? Anyway, he warps to the Mushroom Kingdom and takes a secret passage into the castle's basement. However, before he can get to mapping, the signal on his tracker disappears. For a moment, he worries that something bad happened to his partner. Still, he convinces himself that the magician can handle himself, and proceeds with his mission, which goes rather smoothly. Meanwhile, we get to see what Dimentio is up to on his end. After Fawful leaves, Dimentio makes preparations to search for something. He isn't exactly pleased when he finds out which dimension it's in. For some reason, he can't let the bean find out about it, which is why he fries the tracker with his magic. Wow, gee, thanks buddy. I'm sure Fawful really appreciated the extra anxiety. The dimension in question is a medieval-like setting, a kingdom with people going about their business. Dimentio enters the gates of a large castle. What's strange is that he seems very familiar with the place. He disturbingly recalls a time when he had littered it with blood and corpses. This is a Mario fanfiction, right? The inhabitants aren't too happy to see him, and unfortunately for them, the guards can't land a hit on him. The king arrives and seems to recognize the jester. He confidently proclaims that his magicians will surely be able to defeat him. Dimentio humors them for about a minute before killing all 4 of them, along with 2 more guards. Backed into a corner, the king is forced to hand over the artifact that Dimentio is looking for before getting killed himself. This artifact is none other than the Dark Prognosticus, the terrifying book that Count Bleck, Dimentio's old master, once used to try and destroy all worlds. Dimentio returns to the castle and starts flipping through the Dark Book's pages before he is unexpectedly met with the distrusting gaze of Fawful. The scientist, of course, questions him about his whereabouts and the ring. The jester lies and changes the subject. Fawful tells him that there will soon be a Halloween party at the castle, which Dimentio says might work in their favor. He reveals that he plans to have them capture Mario, Luigi, Peach, and Bowser one by one.
Would it not have more easiness if we were to capture them all in one attempt?
Fawful questioned. That wouldn't be very fun, now would it? Fawful looked at him like he was crazy. Dimentio's smile grew, and Fawful immediately averted his gaze. You see, Fawful, I have a different style than you may be used to. Most villains like to get the job done and call it a day. I, on the other hand, like to do things with a touch of flair added to them. Something to make it worthy of being called a plot. Abducting them one at a time will build tension. Not only will they be at our mercy, but those who are next will be in turmoil, wondering every waking moment when they will be taken, and who is doing the taking. They will be nervous, scared. This greatly pleases the bean, so he rolls with it. Although, wouldn't it be tactically advantageous to pick them off one at a time anyway? If anything, this part of the plan should have been obvious. Also, are you insinuating that Fawful doesn't do things for flair? He turned Bowser's castle into a theater. Just because. Fawful repairs the broken ring and gives it back to Dimentio. Their first target is Bowser. Dimentio infiltrates his castle to spread word of the Halloween party. And just like that, the Koopa King's presence is assured. With that out of the way, Dimentio retreats to his room. More excited than he's been in a while, he sets the Dark Prognosticus on his desk and opens it to the first page. It only has one line written on it. The owner of this book is destined for misfortune. It doesn't scare him. The magician knows that he will be the exception. Just as he thinks this, a wave of dark energy goes through him from the book, leaving him disabled for a few seconds. The book senses something, or rather, someone. Count Bleck, he breathed. He's alive. Dimentio follows the Count's energy to another dimension. Lo and behold, it's the Mushroom World again. More specifically, Mario's house. The jester turns invisible and watches the events unfold. Long story short, Count Bleck, now going by his old name, Lord Blumiere, and his wife, Timpani, were unexpectedly brought to the Mushroom Kingdom by some dimensional disturbance. Dimentio identifies this disturbance as his and Fawful's return from the dead. He brought back one of his worst enemies. Needless to say, he's far from pleased. That's not all, though. Having heard the news, Blumiere's former minions, Ochunks, Nastasia, and Mimi, arrive shortly for a grand reunion. The magician avoids his eyes from the latter. While he is a bit concerned at their return, he sees it as an opportunity to get his revenge on everyone at once. We kick off Chapter 6 with the two villains' party preparations. Dimentio is surprised that his costume fits him, and the story is extremely vague as to what exactly he's supposed to be. Also, yes, they do indeed plan to attend the Halloween hoedown, much to Fawful's dismay. The scientist dresses up as Prince Peasley from the Bean Bean Kingdom, and is insisted by his partner to drop the glasses in favor of contact lenses. He isn't very enthusiastic about this. I don't know. Fawful's no stranger to weirdness, and he certainly isn't against dressing up to further his goals. I find that his character's wound a little tight. While the bean goes on ahead, Dimentio returns to the Dark Prognosticus. He sends a pulse of dark magic into it, causing all the words inside, other than the warning at the start, to disappear. He then takes out a pen and writes a single sentence on a blank page. The seal on this book has been broken. After that, he takes off his mask, looks in the mirror, disgusted, and leaves. Things are pretty standard at the Halloween party. People are dressed up and having a good time. The Mario Bros are there, as well as Blumiere's crew. Dimentio just sits at a table with a glass of punch. He calls Fawful using the ring and tells him to keep an eye on them. He isn't exactly polite about it, though. Keep a close eye on all 5 of them, but do not act unless I say so. Since when are you being the boss of Fawful? Since I became the mastermind behind this plot. Fawful grumbled. Fawful himself isn't enjoying the festivities too much, not to mention that his partner is getting way too comfortable giving him orders. The bean knows that he has to be careful, lest he gets stabbed in the back. He scouts around and finds the strangers he was told to watch doing their own thing. However, when he sees Mimi, he gets a bit flustered. Meh, I've seen worse ships. Mimi is actually enjoying the party quite a bit as her crew of 5 reunites. However, her gaze is drawn to a strange boy wearing a rather regal-looking outfit. His face is pale, one of his eyes is yellow while the other is a dull gray, and meanwhile his long hair is split right down the middle into black and white. His smile is also pretty freaky. Overall, his presence just haunts her. She asks Blumiere if he knows him, and the man looks in the stranger's direction before doing a mental backflip. He's stunned silent for a moment before angrily walking over to the boy and nailing him straight off his chair. Yikes. Well, whoever this mysterious individual is, Blumiere certainly doesn't like him, as it seems that he's wearing the clothes of the former Count's late father. You know, the guy who turned Timpani into a pixel or something. The boy continues to smile as he taunts the former Count, feigning disappointment at not being recognized. It takes a moment, but the group soon realizes that the boy in front of them is Dimentio. They're left with a mix of horror and anger at his return. The jester tries to ease their worries by claiming that he's reformed, but, needless to say, they're all very skeptical. That's when Bowser suddenly crashes the party, as expected. Of course, he kidnaps Peach. The Bros and Mimi try to fight him before Dimentio intervenes, forcing the Koopa to retreat. Unfortunately for him, Fawful lay about a dozen traps in advance. He makes it pretty far, but gets caught in a coil. Dimentio unveils his identity to Bowser and gives him Fawful's regards before sending him to a specially armored cell in Castle Bleck. The rest eventually catch up and check up on the princess. When Mario asks about the Koopa King, and yes, the Bros talk in this one, Dimentio claims that he should be wandering some random dimension at this point, which slightly concerns the plumber. When Bowser's motivation being love comes up, Dimentio mocks the concept, calling it pathetic. This not-so-lovely remark earns him a glare from everyone in the room. Timpani speaks out. Love is a natural emotion, like happiness, anger, and sadness. Surely even you have felt love at some point in your life. Dimentio felt like someone punched him in the stomach. Shock and pain at a horrible memory reflected on his face. Love. He found himself looking at Mimi for only an instant, and in that instant, Mimi registered it. She looked away, and Dimentio turned around, his smile vanishing completely. A very rare occurrence. Love. He had felt it before. Very recently, and also many, many years ago. To love is to be human. To live, Timpani pushed. Dimentio clenched his fists, shaking. Love, he muttered. Love is useless. Timpani glared at him. Those who feel love are imperfect. He warped away to Castle Black before Tiffany could protest any more. Love. Those who felt it were imperfect. Therefore, he was imperfect. And it wasn't always that way. So here, we see something very different from both this version of the Jester and his canon counterpart. Vulnerability. It's clear that he has feelings for Mimi, yet he hates it. We don't know why he considers love to be imperfect, but the way he disses it so venomously makes it obvious that the emotion is more than just a mere annoyance to him. Mimi's subtle rejection shows that she's probably aware of Dimentio's affections. Whether she feels similar or not is unclear at this point, but it seems she has no intention of returning them. Later, back at Castle Black, Fawful is taunting the caged Bowser with a large drumstick. His boasting is interrupted by Dimentio, who reminds him that they aren't trying to starve the Koopa. The Bean isn't happy with this idea until Dimentio points out that there are much better, longer ways to make the king suffer. He also remarks that Fawful still has much to learn about villainy. Fawful, of course, takes great offense to this, claiming that he learned everything he needed to from the great Kecletta. Yep, everything. Dimentio mentions that he has a history with the Bean Witch. Basically, 9 years ago, they broke into a couple's house to steal some magic crystal, and Kecletta accidentally killed them both and burned their house down. As you do. Though, before they could leave, Kecletta found a baby in the ruins of the building and chose to raise it as her own. And yes, that baby was Fawful. Wait, 9 years ago? You mean to say that Fawful really is 9 years old? That wasn't just Dimentio underestimating him? How in the world does that make sense? What was he in Superstar Saga? 5? Dude, that's way too young. I don't care how gifted he is. A kid that young is not building an army. Anyway, Dimentio, as the respectful partner he is, continues to be condescending. So Fawful, annoyed, goes back to work on his machines. Though he's unable to concentrate because Mimi keeps popping up in his head. Not wanting to waste time, he quickly gives in and decides to go seek her out. The Bean finds her in the garden of Peach's castle. What follows is a rather awkward introduction. Honestly, this is pretty understandable coming from him. I mean, he probably isn't the most social person out there. My problem with this conversation, besides the fact that Fawful uses his real name, is the fact that Mimi is a bit too nice to him. She even ends up giving him a nickname, Fawfy. She also accepts his invitation to visit his home. A little off considering that Mimi isn't the nicest person by nature. Weird, but I guess we could give her the benefit of the doubt and assume she learned some manners since she stopped being a villain. Wait, Fawful invited her to the castle? Oh dear. Back at Castle Black, Dimentio is having some sort of Tom Riddle's Diary conversation with the Dark Prognosticus. Just as he ends the exchange, he hears a knock at the door. He opens it, to find Fawful, as well as a familiar guest. As expected, Dimentio and Mimi aren't too pleased to see each other. She throws a few words of hatred his way before trying to attack him. However, he uses dark magic to take away her powers before brutally throwing her across the castle. He sinisterly welcomes her to her new prison before letting out a laugh that fills both the girl and Fawful with despair. From then on, Dimentio does everything he can to make sure Mimi's life is absolutely miserable. It pains Fawful to see her tortured by the Jester's magical attacks, but he can't afford to help her. Mimi hit the ground and rolled, coming to a stop facing Fawful. Fawful looked at her, concerned. Mimi stared up at him. You'll have to cease with the insults, Mimi, or more harm will befall you. Dimentio snickered, pressing the tips of his thumb and middle finger together. Mimi looked up at Fawful, horrified, silently pleading. Help me, she mouthed, tears forming in her eyes. Fawful looked at her, shaking, gripping his spork tightly in his hands, white-knuckled. Thoughts invaded his mind, passing through before he could fully register them. Fawful had been a villain since birth. He'd been brought up as one. The Meyer brothers, and Bowser. They needed to pay for their crimes against him. Dimentio was helping him, actually, as much as he hated to admit it. Dimentio was the brains of the entire scheme. Without him, this would be nothing. He was Mimi's enemy. If he stood up for Mimi, would Dimentio abandon him and avenge himself on his own? That's his motive. Love. Pathetic. Dimentio's words flashed through his mind. Love is useless. Fawful almost collapsed under the hopelessness. He knew what Dimentio would do. Those who feel love are imperfect. There was no other option if he wanted revenge. He couldn't do anything. Fawful turned away.
Fawful is a villain of excellence,
He said, controlling his voice.
Fawful cannot waste time on a little girl like the one which is you.
Mimi looked shocked for a moment, then it left. The look she gave Fawful when it did was so horrible that Fawful was glad he only saw it out of the corner of his eye. Even so, he felt his heart shatter as he saw that fleeting glance. Excuse me? Dimentio was the brains of the entire scheme? Without him, this would be nothing? I mean, yes, you're right, but it didn't have to be like this.
Hello? Hello? Anybody home?
You built an army of robots and took over an entire kingdom. You worked your way up from the role of lowly minion to a main antagonist. You are by far one of the least dependent people in the world. Why do you need this clearly untrustworthy clown? Also, we just established that you're 9. What right do you have to call Mimi a little girl? She probably looks older than you. The two villains discuss the capture of their next target, Peach. Fawful is told he'll have to reveal himself for the maneuver. He initially refuses, but Dimentio manages to convince the Bean to do so. The operation succeeds. It isn't without some difficulties, however, as Dimentio, if you remember the party, is currently a friend as far as the heroes are concerned. So, in order to keep up the act, he tries to stop Fawful without telling him in advance. That kinda sounds like something you'd want your partner to know. Why are you still working with him? While he fails to stop Fawful, the Jester's cover isn't blown. However, with the subsequent disappearances of Bowser, Mimi, and now the princess, the heroes start to get suspicious. Later, back at the castle, Dimentio chases the terrified Mimi across the halls. One of his attacks trips her, and she is left trying to crawl to safety. However, the girl soon realizes that she has no way to escape. Confronted with the belief that Dimentio is about to kill her, she completely breaks down and cries. Dimentio, though, ever the gentleman, keeps taunting her. At this point, Mimi is desperate. She's prepared to do anything to get away from him. She impulsively reaches into her pocket and pulls out a transparent ruby containing a white rose. Before Dimentio can do anything, she smashes the jewel on the floor, shattering it. For some reason, Dimentio is actually hurt by this. His smile completely disappears, he touches down to the floor, and he walks away, dejected. Meanwhile, Mimi stays on the floor, not believing that it came to that. Then, Fawful suddenly shows up. All this was happening very close to his room. Mimi tells him to go away, but no. The Bean invites her to his quarters, and Mimi acquiesces. I mean, what are you gonna do? He is one of her captors, after all. Mimi is pretty amazed at all the technology in the room, and she's especially surprised when she finds out that Fawful's only 9 years old. She asks him why he's working with Dimentio. Fawful answers that while he doesn't like it much, he's doing it for revenge. Plus, he's in the Jester's debt. Really? How so? Yes, Dimentio did teleport them both out of the underwear, but it was Fawful's energy that allowed him to do so. The escape from the underwear was a team effort. I don't think Fawful owes him anything. Questionable logic aside, Fawful ends up confessing to Mimi that he likes her. A lot. And hopes that she isn't angry with him. This obviously comes as a surprise to her. Mimi doesn't say anything about returning his affections, but she does sort of say that she isn't mad. Overjoyed at this wonderful news, Fawful decides to go talk with Dimentio to make him stop hurting her. She's not angry that he allowed Dimentio to torture her this whole time. I don't think Stockholm Syndrome works that fast. Also, Mimi literally just went through a crushing experience with someone she clearly has feelings for. Does she really need a confession from one of her captors right now? I mean, it's cool that Fawful decided to help her out, but maybe, realistically, he should have kept his feelings to himself for the time being? Anyway, in the meantime, Dimentio is having a bit of an existential crisis. In his depressed state, he's losing conviction in his actions. He starts to see himself as evil. Still, he knows exactly what the source of his doubts is. That's when Fawful enters the room. He tells Dimentio that he wants him to stop terrorizing Mimi because he loves her. This unsurprisingly forces a double take from the Jester. Dimentio suspiciously agrees to leave her alone. Something's amiss here. Later that night, Mimi dreams about a girl who looks almost exactly like her. She cryptically talks about a boy she used to know, repeatedly mentioning how evil he's become, in contrast to his once kind-hearted nature. Horrifyingly, she also has a hole going straight through the left side of her chest. You know, where the heart would be. Mimi is shown a memory of the girl playing with this kid. Soon, it becomes clear that the boy in question is, or at least was, Dimentio. She wakes up, feeling an overwhelming desire to go to the castle dungeons. When she gets there, Dimentio is waiting for her. He explains that he let her down on purpose, so that they could talk. All my life, I viewed love as a weakness, an imperfection. Fawful feels it towards you. I cannot have love in my helpers. Mimi backed away. What are you going to do? Dimentio would have chuckled, but he didn't have the energy. That isn't the only thing, though. If that were simply the case, I would lock you up in the cells or send you away with no memory of your time here. Though perhaps I should have done that in the first place. Mimi glared again, looking challenging.
You've always seen love that way, haven't you? Just a weakness, huh? That's just stupid.
Yes, a weakness, which is why I have always thought of myself chosen to lead a perfect world without it.
Ha! You say you don't feel love? Well then, how about that girl you killed?
Dimentio gave a start. That was unexpected. Mimi, I've killed plenty of girls in my time. You'll have to be a lot more specific than that. Mimi smirked. Surefire evidence that she knew something about him that Dimentio wouldn't like her to. He grew nervous. This couldn't be good.
Should be easy enough for you to remember. She looked exactly like me, except with pink hair and eyes, and white skin.
It's at this point that Dimentio starts to lose it. He's dumbfounded that Mimi knows about this girl. Meanwhile, she starts to taunt him. Infuriated, he traps her in a dimensional box, which snaps her out of her complacent demeanor.
I've had it, Mimi! Had it!
His fists were clenched. He couldn't believe it. He lost control of his temper, something he had never done before. He couldn't stop, though. He had gone too far. All this time you've insulted me, taunted me, everything I hated from you! And now, this! How could you have known about her?
I don't even know. I just dreamt of her.
That's impossible! Absolutely impossible!
No, it's true. I dreamt of you too.
Yes, and what kind of devilry did you find that you don't already know? None. Dimentio was shocked at that statement. What? There was nothing bad. Nothing at all. I saw you and that girl playing tag or something. That was it. Dimentio winced as he remembered that moment, and dozens of moments like it. You... How? She said you were so kind before, and nice, and now she said you're just evil. You know nothing about me! Nothing! No, but she did, and she said you were kind before. Underneath what you're normally like is someone good. How do you know? Dimentio retorted. How do you know that wasn't just a dream? Your reaction, for one thing, and I remember another time when you showed those good colors, Dimentio. Dimentio lowered his gaze. He did too. What follows is a flashback to a time when both of them still worked for Count Bleck. Dimentio finds Mimi crying in the field of some random dimension. She's upset because a few guys disrespected her. It doesn't seem like she did anything to them, though. You know, it's one thing if Mimi's different after she stopped being evil, but this can only take place at the time she still served the Count. You know, when she was slave driving. If you pissed off Mimi at this point in time, I see 3 scenarios. 1, she pranks you. 2, she eats you. 3, she forces you into eternal labor. Wouldn't she plan some sort of revenge on her own? Does this look like the face of mercy to you? Mimi tells the jester to go away, but he refuses. Not wanting to see her shed tears, he actually comforts her and they share a moment together. Dimentio makes a white rose appear and gives it to Mimi. She's touched by the gesture, but also sad at the fact that the rose will eventually wilt. However, she has an idea. She encases the rose in a ruby so that it can be preserved, and says she'll keep it with her forever. Afterward, she closes her eyes, lifts his mask, and kisses him. Then she warps back to Castle Bleck as Dimentio stands there, a bit stunned. Dimentio stared at the spot she had been. Stupid girl. She has no idea the danger she's up against with me. As he warped back, he knew in his heart that Mimi wasn't stupid, and that even when the Count and everyone else was dead and the worlds were his, he would do his best to ensure Mimi survived everything. Flash forward to the present. Mimi tells the jester that she still believes he can be good. Dimentio has none of it. He opens up about his feelings towards her, and how conflicted he felt since first laying eyes on her. In the end, though, for his plan to work, he has to kill her. As heartbeats start to echo throughout the room, he prepares to snap his fingers. At the last moment, Mimi admits that she still loves him. For a moment, the magician stops. He says that he feels the same, but it is for that reason that she must die. He snaps his fingers, and Mimi disappears in an explosion. With the deed done, Dimentio walks up the stairs, knowing that he'll feel better. Eventually. His thoughts turn to the pink-haired girl. Please forgive me, Rosabella, he whispers. So, I know that a romance between Dimentio and Mimi isn't something you would expect from observing the two in-game. I mean, the facts show that the jester's a huge jerk to her, with reading her diary and all. And yeah, that is a very good point. I see why this one makes sense to a lot of people. However, I kinda like this ship, so I won't be complaining about it. Of course, that doesn't mean it's objectively good. Share your respectful thoughts in the comments below. Then again, Mimi's dead now, so I guess it doesn't matter. Crisis averted? Presumably the next morning, Fawful is walking through the castle's empty corridors, unnerved at the fact that he hasn't met anyone yet. He finds his way into Dimentio's room, where he comes across the Dark Prognosticus. As he touches the cover, the scientist is bombarded with visions of the Void, the Chaos Heart, and Dimentio. He yanks his hand away, horribly shaken by the experience. The last time he felt this bad was when he absorbed the power of the Dark Star. Dimentio finds him in his quarters, and Fawful is rightfully nervous as to what he'd do. Thankfully, the Jester is pretty calm about the being's intrusion. He even explains what the book does. We also get some new information. There's apparently a being inside of the Dark Prognosticus that gives it its power. The seal mentioned earlier is what's keeping the being inside the book. The plan was apparently to have this being join the duo. However, Dimentio says that he has a better idea. He doesn't elaborate on it, though. Fawful then asks about Mimi's whereabouts. The magician answers that he released her, to the being's relief. They proceed with the third phase of their plot, capturing the Mario Brothers. At first, things go according to plan. Fawful arrives unannounced, and Dimentio pretends to fight him alongside the bros. The battle is cut short, however, as Lumiere's crew arrives, carrying Mimi, surprisingly. Crisis unaverted. Obviously, she spilled the beans regarding the Jester's facade. It's kind of surprising that they had to be told to figure it out. I mean, Dimentio only showed up around the time someone got captured, just to disappear to some unknown location after the fact. For someone who once fooled everyone on his own team, this deception wasn't his best work. With the truth revealed, the bros turn on the magician, and things get out of hand. In the scuffle, his mask is knocked off, revealing a not-so-familiar face. His skin is now dark blue, and his features are more monstrous overall. Dimentio explains that he's cursed. At night, his face is human. During the day, he looks like an abomination. Fawful secures Luigi and flips out of the dimension. Dimentio picks up his mask and looks at Mimi. It turns out he subconsciously couldn't bring himself to kill her, so she was teleported instead. That explains why she's alive. He warps out, knowing that Mario will try to find him. Using the return pipe, Mario makes his way to Flipside. He meets up with Merlon and Nullrem, filling them in on the situation. The two wizards take him to the door to Castle Black and see him off as he goes to save his companions. He eventually comes face to face with the two villains, and a battle ensues. Unfortunately for him, Dimentio and Fawful are actually a pretty good tag team. Where was that synergy in the first two-thirds of the story? The Jester manages to immobilize Mario with dark magic. He subsequently brings in Luigi, Peach, and Bowser to watch as the villains finish the plumber off. Lucky for the heroes, Lumiere's crew arrives in the nick of time. Fawful learns about Dimentio's attempt to murder Mimi, which causes him to, understandably, feel betrayed. The magician reveals that he was leading the scientists along this whole time, and that it was never their plan, but his. Well, no surprise there. Mimi, somehow convinced that Dimentio is not a complete psychopath, tells him that what he's doing isn't like him. Yeah, sure. Dimentio counters by saying that nobody in the room could possibly know who he is. In response, Lumiere suggests that he tell them. Okay. The magician finds amusement in this idea, so he agrees. He flings everyone into a chair and covers them in black smoke, deciding to show them instead. With magic. Come on, he would totally say that. So, we finally get to see Dimentio's backstory. According to the writer, most of this section was actually borrowed from another story, SMP Love Stories Dimentio by DeviantArt user Maybe Some Cake, with their permission, of course. One of the things that makes the original Dimentio kinda creepy is that his past is a mystery. We never really get a straight answer for who he is or why he wants to destroy all worlds. It seems like he's doing it just for kicks, and who knows, maybe that is his reason, but we never actually find out. When a character is shrouded in mystery, it's up to the player, reader, or viewer's imagination to fill in the blanks. Of course, that means there's enormous potential for fanfiction. My favorite example of this has to be Undertale's W.D. Gaster. We know next to nothing about him, and he's barely even in the game's code. Yet, we know he exists, or at least existed at one point. Because he's so vague, he could literally be anything. The fandom has expressed this through their many iterations of him. Some are kind, others less so. Which ones are right? We don't know. So many good stories have spawned simply from knowing less. Think about that. Mystery is one of the biggest sources of creativity, and it's awesome. But I digress. Back to the story at hand. This flashback lasts for 3 whole chapters, so I'll try to make it as short as possible. Basically, Dimentio was born the 3rd son of Ganter, the royal magician of some medieval kingdom. His dad and older brothers sucked. The latter two would constantly bully him while he had no means to defend himself. He couldn't really do any magic, and he was pretty weak in general. As for his father, well, he just hated him. I mean, obviously, he named his son Dimentio. So yeah, his life was garbage. That is, until he met the crown princess, Rosabella. Over the years, the two became really good friends. She was actually a source of motivation for him. He got a lot better at magic thanks to her. They grew up together, and things were great. That is, until a declaration of war from a neighboring kingdom was received. Due to some precautions, Dimentio and Rosabella were forbidden from seeing each other. As he sadly walked home that night, Dimentio overheard a conversation between his father and brothers. They were discussing a plot to murder the king. Dimentio brought this news to Rosabella, and his relatives were arrested, but not before casting suspicion on him. Sore losers. Thankfully, Rosabella was able to save him by having him become her personal jester and forbidding him from doing magic so that he wouldn't be considered dangerous. While he was disappointed at that last fact, the new jester was still happy that he could be with his best friend. Dimentio's position as the princess's jester earned him a pretty nice living arrangement at the castle, and with his family locked up, he had a lot more time to himself. Plus, he got to spend more time with Rosabella, who made him a cool outfit and mask. In his free time, he would content himself with reading and practicing a little magic, even though he's not supposed to. While he was at the castle library, he came across a mysterious book. The librarian let him take it since it apparently didn't even belong there. This book later went on to call him for intervals in which he would write in it, not knowing the meaning of the words he was inscribing. His skin eventually turned dark blue from continued exposure to its dark power. The book told stories of other worlds. This newfound knowledge allowed him to discover dimensional magic, a new form of magic, more powerful than the elements he'd been using up until now. He also learned a little bit about dark magic from the book. He used it to make his mask move in tandem with his face. Still, he preferred to stay away from the stuff. After only a year, the war ended, with neither side coming out on top. Rosa's father, King Lucius, invited the neighboring king, King Benz, and his family over for a celebration of peace. During the party, Rose fell in love with one of Benz's sons, Prince Alan, and he fell in love with her. Everyone at the party noticed this, except for Dimentio, who was blinded by his own affections. The next day, as Dimentio was trying to perfect his new magic, Rosabella entered his room, almost in tears. Dimentio accidentally teleported to her side, revealing that he'd been practicing in secret. At first, Rose was angry about this, but it gave her an idea. She asked the jester to teleport her to the neighboring kingdom. As soon as they got there, Dimentio lost sight of Rosabella and spent the whole night looking for her. She finally showed her face in the morning, looking very happy. Dimentio chose not to ask why. This became a bit of a routine, to the point where it happened every night. Meanwhile, Rose would vent more and more about Prince Alan, which put the jester in a bad mood. Whenever Dimentio did ask about what happened in the other kingdom, she would just make up an excuse instead. Oh, and he could tell she was lying. He just didn't press further because of how happy she looked. Honestly, this was kind of a douchey thing to do on Rosabella's part. She knew Dimentio loved her, yet she used him to get to see her prince without even bothering to fill him in. In fact, nobody in the whole castle filled him in. He just blindly helped her while his mental state got worse and worse. One day, when he just couldn't take it anymore, Dimentio refused to help her until she told him what was going on. The jester eventually managed to argue the truth out of her. "I'm seeing Prince Alan." "Why are you seeing him? Isn't it obvious?" At the sight of Dimentio's blank look, she almost laughed. "Oh, you don't know." "Don't know what?" "I'm in love with him, you blind doofus!" she screamed. "Ever since I first saw him at the feast, I've been in love with him, and he's been in love with me." She was in hysterics now, furious at Dimentio's nerve. All she wanted was her love. Dimentio didn't see that, however. Dimentio only saw anger and betrayal. Horrible, backstabbing betrayal. "But Rose, you don't understand. I don't even waste my time, Dimentio. I already know that you love me." Dimentio's balance weakened. You knew? Ha! Of course! It's so obvious. No one's that blind." She paused. "Oh wait, you are." But then he was at an utter loss for words. Rosabella, not caring what her friend thought, just shouted whatever came to her mind. "Ha! You think a princess would love something as low as yourself? A jester? A clown? A servant? You're just so pathetic. I can't even believe you thought such a thing." Oh, and she doesn't stop there. She lets him have it. Like, really have it. And as she's babbling away with her back turned, you have Dimentio on the floor having a mental breakdown. Dude, he just wanted you to be honest. Why in the world would you do this to him? Anyway, the verbal abuse, mixed with dark powers and mental exhaustion, flies Dimentio's mind into a downward spiral. Rose does eventually notice this, but... Snap, went something in his brain. Too late. Dimentio immediately froze, as all the pressure left him. everything was so clear. Feeling the presence of darkness wrapped around his brain, he felt so comfortable, so perfect, so enlightened. He already felt the darkness becoming non-existent in his mind. He wouldn't even feel it soon. It was clear now. He was perfection, and Rosabella was not. In fact, a lot of the world, no, all of it, was imperfect. Heck, every other world was too. Only he was perfect, and he knew it. He had gone through hell and back. No one should have to do that. And there's the psychopath we all know and love. Alright, let's see here. He slowly approaches Rosabella, who's now terrified, and proceeds to...
Hi. Future me here. Just here to say that this part gets a little bit graphic. There was supposed to originally be a segment here of me, like, getting a bit nauseous over what happens, and then, like, slowly explaining it in a very terrified voice. But to be honest, that section sounds really cringy, and I don't really want to re-record it, because I'm not sure if there's even a way to make this bit work. So instead, I'm just going to kind of skip over it, you know? Oh, and if you want to know what happened, well, I suppose just go read the story yourself. You know, if you're old enough, that is. I wouldn't recommend anyone under the age of 14 reading this. Again, it's not the most detailed thing ever, but just after she dies anyway. But, like, again, still pretty messy. And as for what actually happens, well, again, read the story, or I could just say this. You remember this image? This one? Yeah, let's just say it becomes a bit more relevant now. Speaking of, hey, past me, how you doing there?
Oh, God!
Cool. So, I think that's pretty much all I got to say on the topic. So I'm going to pass it back over to past me. I think he should have recovered by now. So, yeah, thanks for listening, and have a nice video.
Back in the present, everyone is rightfully horrified at what they just saw. Dimentio pulls out the Dark Prognosticus and releases the being kept inside. It turns out that it's actually Blumiere's father, who is also apparently Dimentio's father, Ganter. Then, we get another flashback that literally picks up after the last one ended to explain how this is possible. Why not just include it? Long story short, after taking care of everyone in the castle, Dimentio went to the dungeons to find his father and asked him to be the vessel for the Dark Prognosticus. Ganter agreed, and the process turned him into a being of darkness who went on to lead the tribe of darkness and have Lumiere as a kid or something. And, well, you know the rest. Before we continue, tell me if this sounds familiar. A what? A vessel. Someone to seal its power, to make the prophecy come true. If you agree, then I shall make you the vessel. Ganter was intrigued. What does it involve? Well, I split your soul in half and put one half in here. The other remains in your body. You... Ganter was horrified. You split apart my soul? Yes. There are benefits, however. Firstly, you cannot fully die. If you die, then all of your consciousness is transferred into the other half of your soul. You may be released, but only by the person who sealed you. That would be me. Until either this book is destroyed or you are resurrected and then you are killed again, you will not die. Dude, I was joking with the Tom Riddle's diary comparison, but this is literally how Horcruxes work. Anyway, Dimentio uses Ganter to break the curse on his face in some sort of blood exchange ritual. When it's completed, the magician's face reverts back to its previous state. Human, but with dark blue skin. Then, he starts boasting to the group. Blumiere cuts him short, though, reminding him that he too can use dark magic. He frees everyone from their chains, even Fawful, who gives him an "I didn't need your help" remark. Why is he such a brat? We then get a double face-off, Blumiere versus Ganter, and Fawful versus Dimentio. My bet's on Dimentio. Blumiere is a little wounded during the battle. Dimentio takes some of the Dark Prince's blood along with his own and Ganter's, who he stabs in the heart, by the way, that partnership lasted long, and plunges it into the Dark Prognosticus as a sacrifice. Thanks to the book's apparent link to the Void and Chaos Heart, the latter is summoned once more. Dimentio uses the Chaos Heart's power to completely extinguish love from his being. And it works. He doesn't feel anything towards Mimi anymore. Everyone pitches in to fight him, except Fawful, who stays behind, staring at the heart. He considers using it, but doesn't actually follow through, not wanting to meddle with dark artifacts anymore. However, Blumiere sees him and pushes him out of the way. He brings up his staff and shatters the Chaos Heart in half. One piece flies into Dimentio, while the other goes into Fawful, because he's, and I quote, the only other person with enough dark energy for it to really sense. You're telling me that Fawful, who we've established has lost the Dark Star's power, has more dark energy than Blumiere, who is a member of the Tribe of Darkness and can actually use dark magic? Is Fawful the true Dark Lord after all? With the being rendered unconscious, Dimentio manages to call on both halves of the Chaos Heart to force the Void back into the dimensional fabric. And so, the end of all worlds begins anew. As the dimension starts to shake, the good guys escape, reluctantly bringing Fawful along with them. Dimentio stays behind as he relishes his victory. The end. Wait, really? That was a pretty abrupt way to end it. I mean, it's almost as if it was unfinished. Or leading into another story. But really, what are the chances of that?
The Insane Smiles certainly isn't a terrible fanfic, but it is pretty rusty around the edges. In terms of grammar, it's alright. There were definitely some mistakes here and there, but they weren't really enough to take me out of it. The story itself tends to be much darker than your typical Mario story. This aspect doesn't really bother me so much. Keep in mind that this is like my third time reading it. I perfectly understand why many might be off-put by this. Dimentio's backstory definitely seems out of place in a story featuring Mario characters. And speaking of the characters, Mario and Luigi. They speak. I'm not particularly a fan of that, but it doesn't really change much. The bros aren't really that important to the story anyway. The same can be said for Peach, Bowser, Ochunks, Nastasia, and Timpani. There's only about 4 people worth talking about here. First up is Blumiere, surprisingly. He stays in the background a lot, but manages to stick out at certain points. Even though he's left the Count Bleck persona behind, he still has an air of authority and dignity to him. He's often around Timpani and his former minions, who are still respectful and loyal to him. True to his noble origins, the man is very polite, if not a bit nervous about hanging around his former enemies so casually. Clearly, the guilt about trying to eradicate all of existence is still present. Going along with this is that he hates being affiliated with his former identity. Despite this, he's definitely a happier man than he was before. Also, kind of awesome. I mean, freeing everyone from their chains, facing his father in an epic duel, splitting the Chaos Heart in half. Quite a list of accomplishments for his short time in the spotlight. Overall, a fine interpretation of the character.
Next is Mimi. She starts off as just another background character, but following her capture, we get to see a lot more of her. Or so it seems. It's not necessarily that she acts out of character, it's that she doesn't act enough in character. In the game, Mimi is shown to act like a materialistic, mischievous, creepy, and sometimes ditzy teenage girl. And to the author's credit, this is actually shown in at least 2 parts of the story. First, at the Halloween party, Mimi is wearing a Gorgon costume, and it's so realistic that it actually ends up turning someone to stone. And secondly, during her exchange in the dungeons with Dimentio, she taunts him by singing a song she heard Rosabella sing in her dream, one that he would presumably have known her to sing. The only issue with these moments is that there aren't quite enough of them, in my opinion.
To be fair, our favorite shapeshifter is in a pretty difficult emotional position for most of the story. It's probably hard to act like you normally would when you're being physically abused. But even outside of that, there's just a general lack of aspects that make her who she is in-game. To put it bluntly, she's too pure. Look, I'm willing to believe that Mimi is trying to be a better person here. It makes sense since she's no longer a villain. But you can't just throw out her entire personality. Turning good doesn't mean she has to be completely innocent. I mean, one of her themes is literally called "I'm Not Nice." This interpretation doesn't really bother me on a personal level. I kind of like this more vulnerable take on Mimi. However, when looking closer, it feels like there's something missing. Also, Dimentio taking away her powers because magic, so she's forced to be a damsel in distress, is a bit too convenient. Speaking of which, Dimentio is hands down the best character. He has an interesting backstory, he's more explored than his in-game counterpart, and all the while, he still feels like a villain. The writer does a pretty good job of showing how crazy and menacing the guy is. It's even described at a few points in the story that Dimentio almost never stops smiling, even when he's angry or in pain. Not only is this creepy, it also gives him an air of control. What's good about this Dimentio is that you can actually imagine him doing what his canon version does. It lines up. In addition to this, we actually get to see more sides to his character through various different moments. He's not just an obnoxious, menacing, and occasionally sadistic clown. He's often playful when he talks to people, much like the original. However, on top of that, he isn't exactly an emotional bastion either. This is mostly visible when he isn't wearing the proverbial mask. He feels disgust at his own so-called imperfection and gets flustered when things don't go as planned. He also gets angry. Although you also have more tame reactions. At one point, he gets a little nervous about taking things into his own hands because he's so used to acting from the shadows. I like that. Not only is it a pretty cool detail, it's delightfully human. Also, while hanging out with his former co-workers, he actually has a bit of trouble maintaining his composure when they hint at the fact that he's obviously got a crush on Mimi. This would be a bit more wholesome if it weren't for the fact that he's basically torturing her. On that topic, the Jester's relationship with Mimi is sort of captivating in a twisted sort of way. They both have feelings for each other, yet find themselves suppressing those feelings. This is mostly noticeable for Dimentio since his entire plan is to eradicate love. He doesn't want to like her, but he does. For that reason, he tries everything he can to distance himself from the girl. He does so first through physical abuse, and eventually murder. Yet even this does not rid him of her or his feelings. There's possibly a strange sense of pride on the reader's part when he finally does succeed in purging love from his being at the end of the story. I mean, according to his own definition, he's achieved perfection. And that's without mentioning the return of the Void, his original plan. Overall, I find this to be a fascinating interpretation of the Jester. In my opinion, Dimentio, despite lacking some signature charm, is by far the most well-crafted and developed character in the story. It's not really how I personally see him, but I can still appreciate what's been done here. Unfortunately, I can't quite say the same for everyone. Fawful, on the complete opposite side of the coin, isn't so lucky. Whereas Dimentio is treated like a villain, Fawful is shown more like an amateur who's in over his head. A misguided 9-year-old kid. I mean, in some aspects, he's unrecognizable. Is this character even Fawful? Well, yeah. Broken English, metaphors, gadgets, that's all there. His name is Fawful. He has Fawful's backstory. By most means, he is Fawful. However, like with Mimi, there's something missing. And I think it's much more prevalent here. Yeah, you could argue he's more naive with how easily Dimentio manipulates him, but if you ask me, the key trait he's missing is independence. Look at the games. He lived alone in a sewer for who knows how long. More than just a couple devices, he erected an army with his own 2 hands. He planned, executed, and coordinated the invasion of both Bowser and Peach's castles at the same time by himself. All of this to say, yes, he's smart, yes, he's cunning, but beneath that, he's independent. And that trait doesn't really come through here. If anything in this story, he's overly dependent. He can barely find a reason to live without Cacletta, and after being revived by Dimentio, he depends on him to get his revenge on the Bros. A second chance to exact vengeance on his supposedly hated enemies, and he leaves the planning to someone else entirely. Are we talking about the same person? It's a downright contradiction of a very self-reliant character. Keep in mind that this doesn't necessarily make him a bad character. However, it does make him less compelling as an incarnation of Fawful. To me, anyway. It seems the writer was setting him up for an eventual redemption arc, and that isn't a bad thing. Him falling in love isn't a bad thing. Even questioning his motivations is fine. It's okay to explore different sides of a character. I mean, look at Dimentio. But it seems to me that the way it's done here takes away about as much as it adds, if not more. Cunning doesn't have to be tied to evil, and good isn't synonymous with weak. This also makes the premise a bit misleading. The idea of Fawful and Dimentio teaming up is as awesome as it is terrifying, an alliance of two villains who almost won on their own. However, only one of them actually lives up to that status. Dimentio is the mastermind, while Fawful fills the role of a generic lackey. You could replace him with Dupless and it would change practically nothing. Overall, as he stands, this interpretation of the scientist is underwhelming. Still, these changes to Fawful would at least be justified if they actually went somewhere. I mean, his grief over Cacletta, his crush on Mimi, his confusion about what motivates him, his chronic dependence. If they actually went into some sort of character arc, then we at least have a justification for why they exist. It would show that the author wasn't making Fawful like this just because they felt like it, but also because they had an actual plan for his character. Unfortunately, we don't get to see any of that. Therefore, this Fawful is simply stuck in a slump of mediocrity. Okay. So, maybe there's one more part to this story. There's two more parts to this story. Darkmark Soul wrote this narrative as a trio of tales collectively referred to as the Chaos Trilogy. Alone, The Insane Smiles is kinda decent, but lacking polish. As the introduction to the trilogy, though, it's still lacking polish. But there's hope that it gets better in later installments. And if there's one thing I remember, it's that it does get better. And keep in mind, the author started writing this when they were 14 years old. Considering that, it's actually pretty impressive despite its faults. Nonetheless, The Insane Smiles is still my least favorite part of the trilogy. Does its sequel, A Broken Heart, build on what is established? I mean, probably. I don't really plan to make a video on it anytime soon, so if you're curious, you should check it out for yourself. Man, if I actually do cover it, I hope it isn't too much longer. Let's see. The Insane Smiles had about 15 chapters, and A Broken Heart has... Let's take things one step at a time, shall we? So, are we done? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Bye. And that was Darkmark Soul's The Insane Smiles. It's far from the best that fanfiction has to offer, but I still hope it managed to pique your interest. If you want to read this fanfiction, and or the sequels for yourself, there's a link in the description that'll take you where you need to go. This part is mostly just a few closing remarks. It's an afterword. Video itself is over, so if you want to stick around for this, feel free. First thing I want to say, the author actually put out a rewrite of the first chapter of the story a few years ago, just to see how they're progressing as a writer. And I have to say, they've come a long way. Like, it really shows. And I really do like the changes that they made to the story. Like, it's practically a completely different story with how they introduce it, and the dynamic, the new one between Fawful and Dimentio is really cool. And it is. I have to emphasize, it's a one-off, right? We're not getting more chapters of this, but it's just a really fun thing to look at and contemplate. Second thing, it's about Dimentio's backstory, and I just wanted to make a quick remark here about how I can appreciate that the person that Dimentio becomes here, this crazy guy, isn't how there's not really one person that you can blame for him turning out the way he does. He's the product of a series of bad decisions that he made, stuff like messing with dark powers when he really shouldn't have, and also decisions that others made, stuff like the way Rosabella decided to reject him, or how she didn't choose to talk to him right away. And even then, you can read in the story that with Rosabella being the princess and all, she had her royal duties to get to, and they just generally grew distant, So, just a series, really, of unfortunate events that led to that ultimate moment where Dimentio snaps and decides that, well, everything needs to die, basically. And, yeah, so the way I see it anyway, it's not really any one person's fault. And there's just something really cool about that, I find. Also, on a related note, so there's actually a group of people right now, I think, working on this thing called Project Smiles of Insanity. And what that is at least the plan, is that it's a fan-animated adaptation of this whole story, The Insane Smiles, with voice acting, too. Yeah, you guys are insane, but, in a good way. So if they actually, if this actually does get made, I'll be seriously impressed. Of course, I haven't really seen a lot of, the accounts related to the project have been haven't been really active, within, the last couple years, so I don't know how that's going. They're still up, so one might assume that progress is going real slowly. If there's anything this project taught me, it's that even if there's no apparent progress, it doesn't mean that the project is canceled, right? So yeah. And, the fact that something like this is actually even planned, right? It just speaks volumes to how much some people were inspired by this story. And, if it was able to create that kind of inspiration, even if it is, super flawed, it must have been doing something right, huh? And, it's not like nothing has happened. If you go to their casting club page, you'll see there's a spot where a video used to be. It's been privated now, but, I actually got the opportunity to see it when the video was still public, and they actually did have a whole animatic of a small scene, and they actually did have someone voicing it, and it looked, didn't look too bad, frankly, even if it was just an animatic, or a proof of concept in its own right. It just, I don't know, it just seems possible, and that's already crazy enough. And, speaking of that, I would have, being such a fan of this story that I would make a whole 1-hour video on it, you'd think that I would audition myself. And maybe I would have auditioned myself, but, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, whatever. Best of luck to those folks, really. If that's still going on, I really do hope that you guys can make that happen, whenever that may be. And I guess that just leaves this channel in general. The goal I want to go for is I want to talk about fanfiction. I want to talk about the good side, right? The side that you don't really see too much of on YouTube. I want to share that with people. And, well, mostly the video game side, because, well, that's what I'm into. That's the stories I read. I do have another project in the works. It's not another fanfic analytic. This took too long to edit, and even then, I'll probably modify the format for this kind of video, if I do make another one in the future. Talk less about a direct summary of the story, or at least speed up the summary of the story so I can shorten the overall length of it, right? So readers can go read it themselves, I guess. But I have a different project in the works that technically takes less time to edit, but I'm only like about a third of the way through, so that's a huge ways off. I'm not sure whenever that's going to come out. It'll come out. It will come out, hopefully, but it's not anytime soon. In the meantime, I have recorded a few gameplay videos, so you will probably, very likely, see some Let's Plays popping up on the channel. I hope it doesn't devolve into only Let's Plays, because, well, that would kind of overshadow the main reason I wanted to make videos here, but who knows what the future holds. Whatever happens, happens. I will see where this goes. If any of this interests you, maybe consider sticking around. Thank you for watching. Ciao.